Hello, I am Will Larson, and I'm here to talk a little bit about why good CTOs are specialized generalists and what that means. Really, my hope is that there'll be some career advice in here that I think will be useful to anyone who is, trying to become like an executive in engineering at some point in their career, or is one already. So I'm the CTO right now at Imprint. I've worked at a handful of other places. And my fourth book, Crafting Engineering Strategy, is coming out in a couple of months. Pretty excited about that. And I think CTOs, it's a pretty confusing career. I think when you talk to folks who are not engineers, kind of working in probably not a tech role, not like product or design or something like that, but a different org. A lot of times there's going to be this perception that CTOs are the smartest, most technical person at a company. And that's probably true if the company is, 10 people. It might be true if the company is 20 people. It's probably not true if a company is 25 or more people. And that's kind of confusing if a CTO is the head of technology. Similarly, another confusing thing is that if you actually look at a lot of externally hired CTOs, and hey, I'm speaking about myself, I was just hired as an external CTO at Imprint not too long ago. A lot of them don't seem that technical. I think there's a lot of CTOs that you're like, hey, chief technology officer. But you might think like, hey, like when was the last time that this person actually wrote a pull request, actually merged some code, actually did something like truly hands-on and technical. That's pretty weird. So how can these people who are, seemingly coming out of these engineering roles turning into not that technical? How can that be like who companies are hiring into these CTO roles? Shouldn't they be hiring someone who is, again, the most technical, smartest person in the room? It's kind of confusing. Then similarly, a lot of the folks that I worked with in the last decade, that kind of 2013 through 2022, a lot of them who were incredibly talented, I think, are now really flaming out. They really are pretty upset about where the industry has gotten to at this point. If you asked me, a decade ago, who I thought would be kind of succeeding, thriving in kind of these roles today, a lot of those folks who now have effectively kind of gotten stuck in their careers. And part of the challenge here is that good leadership's a fad. When I worked at Yahoo in the 2000s, I was reporting to an eng director. I was basically an entry-level engineer, had 0 years of professional experience. I was reporting to a director, amazing. And I had 2 one-on-ones in 2 years, so basically 1 a year. But really the first one, he complained about one of my colleagues and asked me if I thought they were any good. And then my second one, I was giving notice. So effectively got no direction from my manager. That's just what I expected. So in terms of what we expected or what I expected from him, the team expected from him, it wasn't really day-to-day guidance. It was just, directing us towards something important that could build a great product and solving big problems when they came up. Typically more organizational problems rather than technical problems or something like that. Then we saw in this 2010s era where really a lot of the advice is when you start becoming a manager, the first thing you need to do is to stop writing code immediately. Just put it down cold turkey and focus on coordinating the team, getting their career growth going, making sure that you have great relationships with all these other teams. The engineers are going to do the software part. You're going to manage the team. That's the job. And then you look what's happening over the last couple of years, and there's this real push towards flattening orgs, really lean teams, not scaling the team as the business scales. And so if at any point here you actually took the advice you were given, you would have had a really hard time in the next era. So if you look at my manager in the 2000s who had no one-on-ones, sort of ignored the team in a lot of cases. Then for him, moving to the next era where it's all about career development, stretch projects, helping your team get promoted, retention of the team, incredibly hard shift. In a lot of ways, he kind of got pushed out of kind of these core leadership roles because he just wasn't what the industry was looking for at that moment. But then, same thing has happened again, where a lot of the folks that really thrived in this 2010s era then are getting kind of thrown out of the industry because they just hate the industry that wants them now to be running these teams really directly. And it's pretty surprising if you are listening to what the industry says it wants. Often, like you're getting in a lot of trouble pretty quickly after that. And really, like in these cases, and I think a lot of cases, like the expectations of good leadership are a reaction to the prior era. And that means that, the good leadership of the prior era is the bad leadership of today. And how do you solve that? And more generally, like, okay, how do you solve that problem as an industry is one question. What should you do? Like, how are you supposed to have a career in this faddish, ambiguous career path that you're working in? And so I wanted to share my 6-part theory of developing as a CTO and kind of what I have learned kind of working through this a couple different times and also trying to give advice to folks also working through it. And the first rule is that specialization is how you get early stage CTO roles. So I said before that when you get to like 25, 30 people, you're probably not the most technical person at the company. But as a CTO, you're still one of the most, probably the top 3 technical people at the company, even with 25, 30 people. But you probably have more domain expertise about the problem you're working on than any other technical person at the company, and that will probably be true for years. And so it's the specialization that really helps you like succeed early on and how you get those roles. So typically you are, going to come into that CTO role at really early stage company because you know something about the problem domain, or you're like the most technical person willing to kind of work with the co-founder group, like, or a mix of those two ideas, right? And this is really key. If you aren't specialized, you just can't succeed in early stage CTO roles. They're incredibly hands-on, incredibly detail-oriented, and really ambiguous in ways where you have to be opinionated about what looks good and what's going to get you to the next step. There's no generalist skill set. You can't manage your co-founder into success when there's like 5 of you. You actually have to make the decisions, build the thing that you want to do that will solve like a real problem. And the next version of it, and the next version of it, to actually get real signal that you're building something that works. And I think this is actually true not just in like the first roles, but like in all CTO roles. Your specialization is really the source of your differentiated impact. So you think about like what are you going to accomplish at even like a really large company as a CTO, and what can you do that like the other person who might get this role can do. And really the things that are going to make you special are things that are differentiated about you. And so, for me, something I spent a lot of time developing was this, my writing kind of access created through the writing, and also the ability to kind of like connect to folks across the industry and then pull in, folks who are really amazing to work with as the result of this, work I've done for literally, a couple decades at this point. And that's like a differentiated impact. Like not everyone can do that. That's something like special that, 2 decades in of building to actually have that kind of resource. But specialization comes in like so many different flavors, right? And so I think another thing that I've been able to do in my career is like work in different areas. I've worked in fintech. I've worked in, comm in the consumer space. Back to Carta for fintech again. Now at Imprint, which is yet again like a fintech place. And so building more kind of specialized knowledge on fintech, but also these kind of different kind of flavors of the industry, really valuable, both to have a little bit of many, but going deep in one or two, differentiated. That's something that not any candidate can come in, not any person can bring to the organization they lead. I think really, really powerful. And I think you look at any CTO in terms of things that they're most successful at driving, it's going to come down to something they're really specialized at, and that's powerful. But I think in the first section, we also talked about this idea that specialization is the path to obsolescence. And so if you specialize in fintech, for example, but then, 5 years ago, like the fintech was over, fintech died for like a year or two, and funding got a little bit softer, and there was this sense that these fintech companies of that generation just weren't going to make it like we needed them to. And I think that hasn't really borne out for what it's worth. That's kind of the interesting thing about dynamic industries. Is dynamic industries are wrong all of the time. And so you kind of get the sense, again, going back from the fintech specialization, going to a recruiting specialization. So when I worked at Uber, like sometimes I'd be doing phone screens for like 4 hours back to back. I would do 8 phone screens in that 4 hour block, just back to back to back to back. And then at Carta, I think I directly hired 2 people because that organization I was working in, we just shrunk. Really for the 2 years that I was there, it just got smaller and smaller. And it wasn't just because of Carta. Carta actually like a really fantastic business in a lot of ways, building like a really powerful product. It's just the macroeconomic kind of context this was happening in, this ability to hire all that work really didn't apply that well. And so this is a place where if you build up these specialties that are really useful, if the toolkit is too narrow, if the toolkit is too limited, you actually get a little bit stuck. And so I think you find yourself like just not nearly as valuable. And this is when the first kind of slide about like leaders kind of like getting evicted from the industry, if you will. This is the biggest thing that happened to a lot of them. The people who got really focused on what the industry told them was necessary. And that was, hey, you really need to build the toolkit to develop your team, to kind of plan on the team, to get opportunities for your team, to get your team promoted. And in that moment, the biggest kind of challenge of the industry was this competition between all these like hyper growth companies that were able to hire a lot in practice, but could only hire well, or only hire enough good engineers if they had like all these differentiated strategies around hiring. And part of that was really incentivizing managers to invest into the team that they had hired. And this is great. There's a lot of really powerful things about this, right? But then you have that skill set. You come up in that. Then you transition to this era when hiring is like significantly like devalued as a skill set. When kind of the general sense of the industry is that like employees are more fungible because there's more demand for roles than there was kind of a couple years before. And a manager who's really good at that stuff all of a sudden just doesn't look that competitive anymore. It's still useful, it's still important, but it's no longer the sort of thing that actually makes you a powerful candidate in the industry. It's, again, specialization. It's a source of your impact is the second rule. It's how you get your first job, typically as a CTO, by having some specialty. But it's a real path to obsolescence if you aren't careful about it as well. And that's kind of brings us to the next thing. Generalism is how you keep your job. And so if you talk to, a lot of early stage CTOs, there's like kind of 2 reasons why they fail out most of the time. One is they're kind of a pain in the ass. I just call this like a general maturity challenge where there's kind of a co-founder conflict. They can't get along with the team. They disempower the team around them because they want to control all the details. And so sure, like probably the most common reason that like a founder kind of loses their role, including CTOs, is just general maturity issues. But if you ignore that, if you just assume kind of you filtered that piece out, a lot of the time, and I see folks struggling to scale with their businesses such that they eventually get pushed out, it's really a lack of general skills. And it's not the specialization. Like typically that's how they got the job to begin with, right? It's generalism. And so there's so many little examples, but just to pick like a couple to think about. Equity refreshes. I mean, how many folks know how to do an equity refresh? It's not that hard. If you've been in the industry at a bunch of places, you've probably seen 3 or 4 different approaches they can kind of pick and choose from, kind of pros and cons. But if you don't know how to do an equity refresh, you don't know how to recognize that an equity refresh is really what you need to be doing, then it's just incredibly easy to not do it. Really easy to do lots of things you don't know about. And then you have like a ton of friction as you have to do all these like kind of diving saves to like convince someone to stay when they start running out of equity. And this is a great example of something where if you have this like really general skill set, often from experience, but not exclusively, you can just solve this problem preemptively and you never run into it. If you don't have that kind of depth of general experience, you can just be running into problems day in and day out. So that's one. I think creating a career ladder is like another. Career ladders, no one's ever happy with their career ladder, right? And the first, general lesson about career ladders that you'll learn is what I just said. No one's ever happy about the career ladder. So spending too much time to make people happy, it's almost always not about the career ladder. Because look, everyone hates their career ladder. It's just not a very interesting topic, to be honest. But if you don't have a little bit of experience with that, you might try really hard to make it good. You might spend a ton of time making it really detailed just to realize people still hate it. And so this is one of those things where just having a general skill set, really powerful. Another one is understanding how these different functions work and kind of their biases as they interact together. So how customer support, incredibly important to having like a good relationship with your customers, but typically kind of disempowered by the organizations they're in, where they're a little bit like on the back foot because they feel like they simply aren't empowered to make things better. When you think about sales and kind of the dynamics of sales selling off the menu, and you'd be like, our sales team is bad. Or you'd be like, actually, you sort of want a sales team that sells a little bit off the menu because you want a sales team that is pushing the boundaries a bit, because that's what great salespeople look like. They're not just selling on the menu. They're almost never going to succeed that way. You want them selling a little bit off, because a great salesperson should actually understand the pieces that you're missing that will really matter to the customer. They help you find like the small little things that you don't quite have, but if you just do them, you get the deals. And so just that general experience. And I mean, another could be like planning, and what does or doesn't work. The reality is like most things around planning don't work that well at small companies, and you just have to do something reasonable and cheap and iterate your way forward. This is really like what you need to keep your job. Specialization is your impact, but generalism is how you keep your job. And that's because of the things I've mentioned, just these general efficiencies, but it's also because the people that help you keep your job are, yes, your team, but it's usually not your team that gets you in trouble. It's your relationship with your peers and the CEO. And generalism is like the best tool to keep that relationship strong over time. Equally kind of odd is that if you look at how external CTOs are hired, that process is incredibly geared towards hiring generalists. And you're like, that's because external CTO hiring is just like broken. And that's basically true in my opinion. But it's because your panel is like almost always like the folks who are going to get you fired, which are your peers and the CEO. And so if the panel evaluating you is almost exclusively folks who are not from an engineering background, you're going to get a lot of bias for agreeability. So being really friendly, being nice, kind of seem like you're a reasonable person to work with. Kind of structured thinking that is evaluatable by a non-engineer. So the ability to communicate effectively there and not kind of like bogged down in like technical concepts or something like that. This is all they have to evaluate you on from your interviews. Then there's also like, back channel references, which are also kind of like all kinds of busted, where it really just depends like who they pull back channel references from. It's like everyone who's been working for a while has like some great back channel references and some pretty mixed back channel references, and that's okay. That's just why these external CTO processes are super weird. But it's why they keep selecting for people that you're like, hey, this person is really missing the specialization that they need to have a huge impact. Maybe they're, polite, friendly, but a little bit lukewarm once they get inside. And that's really that's what you'd expect from the way that we actually hire for CTOs. But it means that if you're really focused on your impact, you're really focused on just getting deeper and deeper in your specialties, you're going to have a really hard time whenever you move on trying to figure out what it looks like to get that next job, because these roles almost exclusively select for generalists. Also like people with like pedigree and generalists. Those are the things that go a long way. So the real secret for all of us in the industry is to figure out a mix. And so like the biggest advice I can give to you is to go broad as your role requires, never less. And you do have to go broader probably than you want, understanding different functions, understanding how teams work together, understanding how the industry is evolving, understanding like the finance and budgeting and all those pieces. You really have to first go broad, because that's how you keep your job. You cannot keep your job when your career is basically, your job is kind of selected by your peers and your manager, who's the CEO. Got to go broad first, but then to really drive impact and to keep the respect and the engagement of the engineering team in particular, you have to stack specialties. You have to be able to bring in things you're exceptionally good at that are really additive, that are really special for the team as well. That's really it. So here are the 6 that I just went through. And I think hopefully there's something interesting in there for everyone. And that's all I've got.